I think that we would like to call this the Juan Cotto theme. It is the theme for WIAA Primetime, and it is the theme for Juan on Rainier. When I'm on, I hear that musical interlude. I absolutely love it, Daniel. Daniel Bellows is here today. And so excited to be back and doing the podcast and so many different things that you coordinate and you set up for the year for yourself. And one of those was I was going to do my podcast, and then I had to go down to Olympia. But we did get 2 bills passed on blood donation. We're extremely excited about that as we are doing that. And then I said, something we've got to do this again. And I've been talking with Daniel, and I could not have a better guest, a very, very busy guest, a very, very newsworthy guest. And up front, I will say a longtime friend. Geez, I've known this man for, I always joke that I know a lot of people in this community, but I've known this man since I was very young. When we first met, he was young.
I was young.
Gee whiz. So, but we have grown up together in the political environment. So those of you who know me, those of you who know this particular individual, I'm going to ask him tough questions. I mean, he knows that, and he knows that we're going to have an honest, in-depth conversation about the topics that have come out. And I am excited that he has asked me. We had tried to link up earlier in the year when he announced that he was running for the King County executive position, a position that many of you remember. Of course, many of you probably weren't even born back in the mid-1990s when I served for a county executive called or named Gary Locke, right? And I believe that's where I first ran into this gentleman. And he saw my career then, and he saw my career take off then, and working with the names, and the names are all starting to come back to my head. Tim Cease and Joan Yoshitomi and Kevin Raymond, who was the chief of staff, and obviously Ron Sims and Cynthia Sullivan and the Kent Poulin and that iteration of the King County Council.
Don't forget Ruth Wu.
Oh, you cannot forget Ruth Wu, the legendary Ruth Wu, and a woman who played such a strong and compelling component to all of this and in so many of our careers in the community, and her husband Ben. And it's always nice to talk with this gentleman. We nicknamed him Jaws back in the day, and we had Jaws, and we had the shark working for the county executive back in those days.
We had a veritable aquarium.
We did. And he has thrown in his hat for the King County executive seat. And we are speaking with none other than John Arthur Wilson, who currently holds the position of county assessor. And we'll talk about all of that, because I think a lot of people sit back and like, what is the county assessor? And we will go into all these different issues. John, welcome to Rainier Avenue Radio. Welcome to Juan on Rainier.
Hey, Juan, thanks. I'm really happy to be here.
So good to see you. We're going to talk a lot about politics. We're going to talk a lot about campaigns. As you were walking in, you told me you're doing good and you're having a great time. And I'm sitting here like, whoa, you're a glutton if you're having a great time. I just know running for public office, it should be such a great expression of community involvement and getting out there and participating in the public process, sharing your talents and skills and how you can impact the community. And it always turns into so much more for certain people. Tell us a little bit about the campaign, and tell us a little bit how things are going right now.
Well, I think the remarkable thing is, people are more concerned about their own state of life, the economy, whether their community is safe, and that they don't care about my love life, and as tumultuous as that may have been. It's interesting. A couple of days ago, as I'm sure we'll get into, the county council decided to be judge, jury, and executioner, and said that I should resign. And the only council member, frankly, that had the class to call me up was Jorge Barone, and I'd actually worked for Jorge on some statewide immigration reform efforts. And at one point he said, John, I'm just afraid you've lost faith in the public and they don't trust you anymore. And I said, Jorge, I'm going to respectfully challenge you on that. I said, let me tell you where I was just 4 hours ago. I was down in Auburn, Washington, talking to 50 senior citizens about property taxes, about how we could help them and how we could save them thousands of dollars each year. And I hinted during the official that I was interested in one other office, but I didn't mention that because that's not right. At the end of it, I had probably 10 people come up to me, and they all said, Mr. Wilson, first of all, man, we got to thank you for coming down to Auburn. We a lot of times never see county officials, and that you came here, and that you offered to help us, because we so often feel like county government doesn't care, and I get it. And he said, like, you actually are delivering real tax relief. I said, yeah, that's the program. We fought in Olympia twice to get this done. And then a couple of them said, oh, Mr. Wilson, you mentioned something. What are you running for? I said, I'm running for King County Executive. Now, did one of them say, sorry, I don't have any? No, each and every one of them said, what can I do to help? Because you're the kind of person I want as my county executive. And I've heard that throughout the community. People say, look, either they're not aware of it, which is fine. They got more important things to do, or they go, look, that looks like a he said, she said kind of deal, and that. But people who have known me, people like you, Juan, and scores of others have stepped up and said, look, this is a guy who's actually stood up and delivered. Like one of my dear friends and super champions is Ruby Holland.
Mm-hmm.
And Ruby is like all in, because she says, look, I'm sick and tired of politicians that come and try to shine us on and tell them how good they are for them, and then they don't lift a finger to help the community. And she said, by God, you've gone there. You've gone down to Olympia. You've fought for seniors. You've fought for Black homeowners. And you've fought to make the tax system more fair and equitable. And, when I ran for assessor in 2015, I ran against the incumbent. I beat him in 17 of 17 legislative districts. You can't beat him in many more than that.
Right.
And one of the things I said at the time is I was going to be an activist assessor. So by God, I have been. And at both the state and at the national level. At the state level, we have been the leading champion of property tax reform, especially for seniors. We actually had a bill in the legislature this past year, got through Senate Ways and Means, got held hostage in Senate rules, but would have saved 500,000 homeowners money on their property taxes, real money. And that. At the national level, I have led for the last several years a national work group of assessors from all the major communities, New York, LA, Chicago, Dallas, Houston. And they selected me to lead them because they know I have experience. They know I know how this job gets done, that I think ahead, that I have a vision. So, what I found is as you go around and talk to people, they go, look, we're not interested in somebody who's just looking for a springboard. Mm-hmm. We're not interested in somebody that's interested in, it's their turn or that. They want somebody that'll get in and get things done.
Let's take a step back here for a second. So the office of the King County Assessor. Why do you run for King County Assessor? I'm just going to just bald-faced say that. I mean, that you have mayors, you have city council members, you have these high-profile positions, and then you have what we call these down-ballot races. And, and it's just an interesting thing. I mean, people say, are you interested in running for public office? Well, sure, and a lot of it has to come with the title. I want to be the state senator. I want to be the governor. Who wants to be the assessor? And what does the assessor do? What is the King County Assessor?
Well, I probably more times than not, I'm referred to affectionately as, oh, you're that guy. And I go, yeah, I am that guy. First and foremost, on the one hand, no, I don't set taxes. I set values. But as assessor, I touch everyone in this community, whether you're a homeowner, a small business person, a large business person, a renter, and that. And it's absolutely important and imperative that we set property taxes in a fair and equitable manner. And, some of it I can have influence over, some I can't. One of my great concerns, for example, right now is thanks to coming out of COVID and that, there's been a shift in the property tax burden away from the commercial sector and more to residential and that. 2 years ago, 83% of the $7.2 billion we collected then came out of homeowners. That's way too high. It should be at roughly a ratio of about 65 to 40, 35. But what's happened is like downtown, I've got office buildings that have dropped by 30, 40% in value. We're a budget-based state, so you can't deficit spend. It's got to come out in the end. So it gets shifted around. That's in part why we've been down to Olympia saying, You've got to rebalance the system. Why you do it? Well, again, because you touch people's lives. It is fundamental to the notion I had going back to my early days in politics, back to being chief of staff for Ron Sims, is I view this as a servant mission. On my walls at the office, I don't have a lot of grip and grin photos. I have just 2 posters. One is of Dr. King and the quote, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." And the other is Bobby Kennedy. Some men see things as they are and ask why, things that never were and ask why not. And what I've told my staff from the get-go is those are kind of your guardrails. We want to bend that arc toward justice, but we also want to ask, why not? Let's dream. And so, part of like what we've done is because I have information on every piece of property, this building, the building across the street. But what we did is we finally figured out, how can we make that more useful to the community? So we've worked with community-based organizations. We worked with Mary's Place to help them find opportunities. We were working with a community group that was trying to get 2 pieces of property over by the Columbia City Light Rail Station. I worked with one of my opponents to carefully lay out to him how you would transfer it from Sound Transit, which had used federal dollars to buy it, so it couldn't go directly to the community, but you move it to the county, and then the county could donate it. That was 6 years ago. You know how much progress that person has made so far? Not a bit. It's still in the hands of Sound Transit. So, Juan, I took an approach that the assessor could be more than just a ministerial role. Mm-hmm. That while I don't set policy, I have data and information that can empower things. And that, for example, another thing we did, and I went to Dow Constantine, the exec at the time. I said, sitting out on Aurora is a Sam's Club, Walmart's, Costco, 144,000 square feet, big commercial kitchens inside it. They shut it down in 2018. It's been sitting vacant ever since. Back in 2018, I said, look, this would be an ideal place to put a shelter in, kind of pop up with that, but it's big, it's kitchens, all that stuff. That's an interesting idea. Did it ever happen? No. And that's in part, if you will, what drives me to I want to be county executive. I don't give a damn about the title. You could call me county bottle washer. I'd be fine with it. That's not what I'm in it for. But I want to get stuff done. And I'm sick and tired of government at all levels that talks and talks and talks and doesn't do. Because I think the public is desperate to say, what the hell have you done for me?
Tell me, and let's talk about this in our own community. And we're seeing the hints of frustration of governments that talk more than they actually do. We have a city government who tends to that we have a number of municipal governments that people hear about. The homeless situation has run rampant now more for almost 20 years, with no real tangible progress and very, very few solutions, but a lot of money being thrown at it. You have conservative leaders, Jim Walsh in particular, who's a friend, and he cracks me up, and he's going around the county and just showing how these crazy liberals aren't doing anything, but they're talking a lot, and we don't have the support. You need to turn this whole community around and look at some of the things that we're looking at. Tell me what you think in an executive body like the King County Executives, the King County Executive's Office, and the King County Council. Tell me what are some of the fundamentals that you believe that you can change when you're in that office that would indeed make it more effective. Sure. You're going to be working with the state council,
right? But with a different style of leadership and that. And I'm not going to beg for permission or that. There's several things we can do. Day one, we need to have a public safety summit to try to make our streets safer and realize that we have sadly dangerous people on our streets that we need to take off. Too often what you see, and you hear it from beat cops, whether they're in Seattle or Kent or wherever, that they arrest somebody on a felony, they take them to the jail, and they're often back on the street before the cop is even done with the paperwork. Catch and release is a salmon recovery strategy. It's not a public safety strategy. And in a lot of cases, what you desperately need to do with these people is book them and hold them for the 72 hours so that you can go through screening to determine, here's somebody with both mental health and addiction issues. Let's get them treatment and that. Let's not just lock them up. But you don't put them back on the street. The tragic murder in December of Sean Yin was inexcusable in that he was murdered by somebody that they had arrested earlier on a charge of, manslaughter. He murdered his domestic partner. They didn't make the case. They put him back on the street. And clearly he had anger issues and mental health issues. And what did he do? He killed this amazing, dedicated Metro bus driver. We can put an end to that by being smarter about how we do it. And it doesn't mean you just lock everybody up, but what you see so often, and I hear it in communities of color, they go, we're the victims. Like, what about us? I was talking to a small market African-American businessman. He says, John, look, here's what I struggle with. Somebody's shoplifting from me every week. Sometimes a lot of times no. But probably 2-3 times a year, somebody rams a car in or throws something in, busts in, takes thousands of dollars. And I file an insurance claim, but you only get one a year or one. And so I'm out all that money. And he said, I want to serve my community, but I can't do it if I'm under constant siege and that. You hear from others of the concern that, look, we've got to be smarter about it. So that's one area. Homelessness, for God's sake, when are we going to face up that the Regional Homelessness Authority is a bust? And if I'm executive, I'm going to pull out of it. And I'll give you a 12 months notice, but we're going to replace it with an effective collaboration between the cities and the service providers. Because one of the things you hear, and I talked to a lot of those service providers in that we've helped them cite things and that, they said, look, the Regional Homeless Authority maybe been a great idea, but just abysmally executed and millions of dollars spent. And we actually have a worse homeless situation than we had before. Well, you don't keep pouring bad money after that or good money after that. You say, stop the hemorrhaging, recast it, re-engage the local communities that know what they need. And then, re-engage the social service providers. Yes, for God's sakes, try to pay them a decent living wage, because so many of those people toil for just above minimum wage, and that's just not right. But you don't need the low-income housing industrial complex created, and so there are things like that you can do. You can look at real property tax reform to, like I said, help homeowners, help renters, help small businesses, and that to help rebalance that equation. Now it's at 72-28, but it should still be better. But that's going to take somebody to go down to Olympia. And then you need somebody that's going to provide a realistic look at sound transit. And, I want to be straight up and really clear with people. I support expansion of public transportation. Heaven knows we need it. Anybody that's spent any time here knows that. But when you look at the cost of ridership estimates from West Seattle to Sodo is estimated to be $2,200 a rider. You could hire a fleet of plaid Teslas to pick everybody up individually for less than that. And we've got to recognize the world has changed. Just as we would not be implementing, we're going to build Sound Transit 3 with horse and buggies. Really? I don't think so. So it's like an executive that is tuned in can make a difference, and one that isn't necessarily, I'm not looking for a higher office. And frankly, one of the things I will propose right off the bat is term limits for the county executive. 2 terms, get in, get going, get out. But don't sit there and cling to it for dear life or waiting for your turn, because you've seen what happens. And I think one of the things that frustrates the public so often is they don't feel like government moves with the same urgency that they feel. They see things happening in their neighborhood and they go, why can't you fix this? Well, we've got to do a study in that. In my background, Juan, one of the things I was a producer for live television news broadcasts. Each night we went on, I heard you doing call time, rundown times. My show ended at 27:35 after the hour, not 27:36 but 35. And so you couldn't sit in the middle of the show and say, Juan, let's take a commercial break and take like 15 minutes to talk about how we want to do the next segment and that. No, you make a decision. And, I've always told my staff, look, it is easier to beg forgiveness than permission, and assume that you've got my permission. One of the things I found was Budget Director Dwight Dively, who I have a world of respect for, came to my deputy and said, our bosses had a really good discussion, but your boss has a different decision cadence than ours. And my deputy, Al Dams, who's a dear friend of mine too, he said, what do you mean? He says, well, your boss seems more oriented toward actually getting things done. We have process. And Al said, yeah, John comes from a background. He's into following process, but he doesn't want to process the hell out of things.
You are with Juan Cotto on Juan on Rainier, and this is the King County Assessor John Arthur Wilson, who is running for the highest office in the county, the King County Executive's office, overseeing the county government in this county, which is about the size of the state of, Jesus, it's larger than several states, Delaware, Rhode Island.
It's physically larger than Rhode Island.
And has a population of what?
We are 2.3 million, so we are the 12th largest county in the United States. We're larger than, a lot of states.
The politics in Western Washington in particular, but in the Seattle King County area, the King County Executive, we have become fairly, people call it left wing. We become fairly liberal here. Our congressional office holder, in particular, Pramila Jayapal, kind of lights it up, and she has her big demonstrations downtown. It just seems like some of the elected officials in our community are becoming younger and younger, and they are promoting ideologies that are moving further and further to the left. I remember when I was running for office, and I remember when I was a ripe young 20-something working for the Patty Murray campaign, and I was 33 when I ran for the state legislature, and they said, you young lefties, but I felt like I was far more moderate than the lefties of today are. Maybe it was, maybe it's just a sign of the times. The political environment in our community, what has driven this so far left?
Well, I think some of it is an absence of real opposition. I think some of it is that, frankly, you've seen the community's politics fall into sort of dogma over solutions. And you look at what's happened with the Seattle City Council and you can see, that it's kind of has spread out. I think it's also that, look, we are going to be, as a county, clearly a blue county. But there's also some things where you go, there's a price to be paid for that. I think back to literally like the very first time I voted was in 1972. My parents were lifelong Republicans. I broke my parents' heart in that I voted for George McGovern and Dan Evans. Now that made perfect sense to me. And I think part of it is, sadly, what we've seen is a surrender of that kind of moderate wing of the Republican Party that used to work together. I laughed that one of my opponents said, well, we need an office of reproductive rights. Well, that's not going to help a single woman get the health care she desperately needs at a time like that. And here's the other irony to it. Washington State has reproductive rights in its state constitution because of a Republican named Joel Pritchard. Now, I knew Joel Pritchard, and my opponent who has proposed this is no Joel Pritchard. But we forget sometimes that the person who proposed a state income tax 3 times wasn't some ultra-liberal Democrat. It was Dan Evans. Dan Evans, who was determined to make the state tax system more fair and equitable. It was Dan Evans that wouldn't follow the line of the Californians that rejected bringing Vietnamese refugees in, but sent the late Ralph Monroe down to bring them home. And there's scores of young Vietnamese people that are now named Daniel or Jackson because of Dan Evans. I've been very blessed that I worked for Dan when he was chair of the Northwest Power Planning Council. I worked for Congressman Al Swift back in Washington, D.C., who people were often surprised actually had a more liberal voting record than Mike Lowry. I worked for Ron Sims, who taught me a great deal about that service mindset. And, I think we've drifted away from that. I think, unfortunately, it becomes more about clicks and bites and have I got a hot TikTok video to punch up or something like that. But the public goes, I ain't left or right. I just like to see something work. Could we try that for a while? Mm-hmm. And, I think what you see when you get outside the city of Seattle, but you also frankly see it within the city. People say, look, I'm not all that ideological, but I am really frustrated that, like, when I go into the grocery store or like a Fred Meyer, I swear half of what I want to get is all behind lock and key. I don't like the notion that, my daughter or my sister or my wife or my cousin don't feel safe on the bus. And they go, is it asking too much that we deliver on some of the core things? And no, it isn't. But what you've seen happen, and we did it somewhat coming out of COVID, is on the one hand, thank God there was the federal money coming in, but we invested it in shiny objects rather than investing it in what really mattered.
He is John Arthur Wilson. He is our King County Accessor. I'll get that right. I almost said King County Executive. He's running for the King County Executive spot, so let's not be premature. Let's go ahead and give him the benefit of the doubt as King County Executive, a King County Executor, King County Assessor. And we thank him for being on Rainier Avenue Radio's on Juan on Rainier. And we're going to take a little break, and we will come back and have more to this conversation when we return.
To Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Check us out on social media, Facebook and Instagram, Rainier Avenue Radio.world, and on Twitter at Rainier Av Radio.
So I needed to check my kids' immunization records for their school. My doctor told me I could get them quickly online, but I couldn't figure out how. Thankfully, I could turn to Link to Care WA for help. With Link to Care WA, I was able to learn how to use online health portals, use telehealth to talk to my doctor virtually, and even apply for jobs online. I called their free hotline and got help from a real person. Call Link to Care WA at 866-757-1832 or visit linktocarewa.org.
What's going on, world? It's your boy OG Mambo.
And your guy D Money. Join us along with Pint Size Patron and ID Yourself.
Here on Fresh Juice at Rainier Avenue Radio.
Every Wednesday hump day from 9 to 11 Pacific.
Get exclusive interviews from your favorite artists, all the hottest music, and updates on what we got going on in the world.
That's every Wednesday, 9 to 11 p.m. on Seattle's Rainier Avenue Radio.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects. For more information, visit kingcounty.gov.
Greetings. This is your host, DJ Neftali, Rainier Avenue Radio.world. the best DJ in the Seattle area. You can catch me every Monday at 8 p.m. on YouTube. Like I said, this is DJ Neftali, the best reggae in Seattle, Washington, the best radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Come on, right?
Love food? Here's some storage tips to keep it fresh longer. Store cut fruits and vegetables in the fridge. Place in reusable containers. Keep bread in the freezer for longer storage. 40% of food in the U.S. goes uneaten. Save money, save food, save the planet. Visit Seattle Public Utilities for more tips.
This is Paul Pearson, host of Star Time. And when I'm not meeting Mrs. Jones in that cafe for a chat and nothing else, I'm listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
Welcome back to Juan on Rainier, on your community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio.world. And we have a really wonderful guest today, John Arthur Wilson, coming in and sharing with us, number one, his knowledge, number two, his experience, and his current campaign for the King County Executive seat, currently held by Shannon Braddock. And obviously Dow Constantine was in that seat since Ron Sims left for the Obama administration. It was early 2009.
Yeah, sure was.
He was King County executive for a long, long time. He, of course, transitioned into the position of the Sound Transit executive director. A lot of people didn't like that, John. A lot of people that I talked to in the community and friends of mine, they were like, they expected a little bit more in regards to that process, which felt just a little bit uncomfortable for a lot of people, except for the ones who ultimately made the decision and hired Dow over people who had extensive background in operating transit systems throughout the country.
You mean the question of when you appoint the majority of the board that then appoints you as see now, Juan, what I wanted to do is see if I couldn't structure that for the county executive race, that I would appoint the voters, but they told me it doesn't work that way. It only in small categories. Look, Sound Transit needs leadership. Dow has run large organizations, but he doesn't have transportation experience. I think it was a mistake. I think it was a mistake on his part. I think it was a mistake on the board's part. Both of my opponents happily voted for it. I think several things that we need from Sound Transit. One, there needs to be a comprehensive audit of where we're at, how much have we spent, how much is it going to take, what's the ridership going to be, so we can look at it with a cold, clear eye. That's step one. Second, I think it very much is clear that we need to reform the board, and at least a portion of the board should be directly elected by districts, so that the people who pay the taxes for Sound Transit actually have a voice in Sound Transit. The third thing is, frankly, there should be a no-fly zone, if you will, that if you've been on the board, you can't go from the board immediately to the agency, but that instead there's some time period where you come off the board and then you could go. One of the things you hear repeatedly is what Sound Transit has missed repeatedly is it doesn't have expertise in planning, construction, or operations. And you know, it would be helpful if you had on the board some slots that were designated toward those expertise that could provide that next CEO or provide Dow with the notion of, okay, from experience, here's what we know. And, you know, again, part of it is also recognizing the world of transportation is changing radically and rapidly from where it was when we first approved Sound Transit. And heaven knows, you know, look, we blew it when back in the day of Jim Ellis, an amazing civic leader, We didn't approve the subway system for forward thrust.
Mm-hmm.
You can now visit our subway system in Atlanta.
MARTA.
Yeah, you can literally fly in on Delta and walk to the MARTA station, and you can go, there's my subway. And we blew it there, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't give up on mass transit and that, but there are smarter ways to do it, and we ought to do that.
Not giving up. Okay. I remember just when I ran for the state legislature in 1998, I had just gone through a divorce. My wife of almost 2 years, Kimberly Reason, wonderful human being, and still a tremendous friend of mine today. And we decided to get divorced. And I found it very cathartic running for office. And there were some people who were in the 37th district. At the time of the 37th district was the old 37th district. We had 6 people running, and it was a contentious race, and we were running around with the energy and everything. But and people were saying things about that, and Kimberly, wonderfully stepped up and said that she was supporting me and really helping in that thing at my personal. And there were times where I was thinking to myself, why am I doing this? And then I look at your situation, and let's talk about the situation. And let's talk about and I want to go something you touched on earlier, and I wanted to the conversation from Councilmember Barone. How much did that mean to you when he reached out and at least had an opportunity to share his thoughts with you, and at least was going to talk to you person to person?
It was huge. I mean, it showed class. I think part of what we so often lose sight of in politics is it is still a space for grace. And he showed the grace in that. He started the conversation by saying, look, I'm probably going to call for your resignation. I said, that's obviously I'm not thrilled about that, but let's talk, because we'd had a really good working relationship.
How do you not take that personal? How do you not, in politics, right? And Juan, you can't take it personal. How do you not take that personal?
Oh, look, at some degree you do, but you go, all right, but let's talk about this. I mean, look, the shame of this is we have a number of lawyers on the King County Council. When you raise your right hand and take an oath, you take an oath to the United States and the state constitution. And those documents somewhere include the rule of law, the presumption of innocence, and due process. And what you've had is 2 council members, and one in particular, Ms. Belducci, who decided to throw that out the door. Now, it's great to go down and protest your heart out about the Trump administration and all that, but then to come to the local level and decide you're going to single out your opponent because you think this is a way to knock him out of the race, and use your position of authority in a way that is unethical. And probably a violation of your own bar oath and your oath to office. But, with Barone, I thought, look, you were classy about it. And I don't expect to always agree with everybody on everything, but let's talk. And I think my sense was a bit with him that after, I said, well, let me tell you what I've been doing 4 hours ago. He went, oh. So tell me what you'd like to tell the audience. Tell me, and it's a situation that's so personal, and you're right. Who really cares about your personal issues? Tell me what, if we're just having a conversation, tell me, give me just a brief thing on what you'd like to tell us about this situation. My former fiance, Lee Keller, I loved more probably than anybody else I've ever loved. Unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, and I'm not going to go into them now, she's never been able to honor the commitment that she made to me. And it's tough when you feel. There have been times in our relationship that were just marvelous. We were in a little sushi restaurant on East Lake a couple months ago. And after about 15 minutes, one of the servers came up and she said, a couple of us have been talking about you. And I'm going, oh my, what did I do? I said, no. We were just looking, the energy with you two is just remarkable. And that's really was true. But what I also knew is Lee has some tremendous stress factors in her life, and they have ramped up to a point where there is no room for our relationship. And I've reached the conclusion we're done. It hurts, Juan, because I have never, ever abused her to a bit. And I was raised as such that, you know, I would never raise a hand in anger against somebody. And, you know, it is also painful when you have somebody like Balducci make the reckless claim that I am showing disrespect to victims of domestic violence, when both my own youngest daughter has been a victim of domestic violence, and she has had to live through this, and it's been hell for her. And frankly, in an April 2024 incident involving Lee and I was a victim of domestic violence by Lee. And, you know, I thought we could move past it. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to. And I wish her the best. Part of me still loves her. But, you know, as one of our counselors, a very wise man said, John, sometimes love is not enough. Mm-hmm. And in this case, sadly, it's not enough.
John, let's just go over the surface details of the case. If it is a case at all, you have not been arrested. Is that correct?
No charges, never arrested. None of this has been before a judge for a full airing. So it's only, you know, ex parte or one party allegations that have made. And unfortunately, there are many of them in the court filings that are just erroneous and false.
Well, does that include from what I understand, it's the stalk? Was there stalking involved?
No, there wasn't stalking involved.
How do they come up with this type of stuff?
Well, both of us had used over the years, because of our busy schedules, location sharing apps. So yeah, we know where each other are. Now, obviously, we're not doing this anymore. Mm-hmm. She was the one who initially had proposed it for me. I said, okay, fine. But stalking, no. I mean, you know, the shame is, again, there are real victims of domestic violence mm-hmm. out there. And they desperately need help and access to a judicial system. This should not be a case where what is meant to be a shield to protect someone can be turned into a sword to try to, you know, destroy somebody's reputation. And I wish this wasn't a case, you know, as recently as, you know, mid-March, about a month ago, or mid-May, rather, about a month ago, Lee was saying, look, I feel awful. I'm dismissing the TRO. Is there any way we can get back together? And in fact, one of the important facts here that gets lost so often, one is there is actually a signed dismissal by both parties of this TRO. And there is an order for a judge to sign that has been signed by both parties. That's a legally binding document. But when I declined to pay her rent in June, she turned and said, I'm not going to live up to my agreement. You know, and you come to this terrible feeling that, is it that you love me, or is it the nearly more than $250,000 I invested in this? I co-signed for her son's student loan. When we had to break a lease on the house after the incident in Sammamish, I paid $25,000 to get out of that. As recently as in March of this year, when she needed to make her dues payment to the Fifth Avenue Theater Board that she sat on, she said, I don't have the money. I said, all right, I've got money and that. So she took $15,000 out of a joint account and paid the Fifth Avenue. Time and time, her sister, who is driving now back to Colorado, has been very sick. I paid for multiple trips for Lee to go back and forth to Colorado. And in fact, in early April, she asked, would you please come back and help me? We're going to try to move Jill back home to Seattle. I said, sure. And I came back and it was the anniversary of the day of the domestic incident in 24. But rather than her being all angry about it, I arrived and she had taken her lipstick and scrawled on the mirror, "Love you, sweet John. So glad you're here." And there was a beautiful card and all that. But, you know, in March and April of this year alone, in that joint account that only I had put money in ever, she went through close to $30,000. You know, yeah, she's been financially struggling. It's you know, I know, having run my own consulting firm, it's tough out there, especially coming out of COVID. And I wish her well. And I hope, you know, she finds someone, and most importantly, frankly, she gets the help she needs. You know, one of the things I will be forever grateful for her, and you can see it here, Juan. She encouraged me early in our relationship. She said, "I love you, but I'm worried about your health." And I was nearly 400 pounds. I have lost 180 pounds.
I know that.
I am in the best health I have been in my entire adult life. And while she would often say, "You did it," I said, "Yeah, I did it. But if I hadn't had your support, I couldn't have done it." And I offered repeatedly to her, I go, "Honey, get the help you need, and I will be there every step of the way." But unfortunately, every time we talked about this, and sometimes I'll admit I yelled at her about it because I cared passionately for her, she never got the help. And it reaches a point where I can't run for county executive and have someone who is that unpredictable in my life and who can change back and forth. I pulled for my attorney text messages over our 7 years, or 4 years rather. We texted everything apart because our relationship started during COVID. And I pulled just the text message strings from May 20 to the end of May between the two of us. It was 146 pages. And the very first page of it began with a text from me to Lee. And she'd reached out to a mutual friend. And I said, "I'm so happy. Thank you for agreeing to dismiss the TRO. I really appreciate it." Immediately came back the answer from her, "Oh my God, my heart just flipped. I've so missed you. I love you. I can't wait to see you." And she then violated her own TRO by saying, "You know, can we get together?" And I said, "Well, she says, no, I'm having it dismissed." I said, "Okay, well, as long as that's the case." You know, love's messy sometimes, and certainly ours has been messy. And I think that there is part of us that still very much loves each other. But the painful reality is it isn't going to work.
You are running for the King County Executive. You obviously have had some media scrutiny to deal with. And one of the disadvantages I've always felt about being involved in the traditional media is that they either have 30 second sound bites, they have 60-second stories to get out there, or they have 450 to 500 words columns they have to write, and that obviously can influence public opinion. And just reading in the newspaper, and then and as you come in here and we get a chance to talk, and that's why I love this format, because we can kind of go into the layers and the layers of the relationship as it existed, and what you have done. How do you feel you're able to combat that, especially number one in the throes of the campaign? Number two, you are still the King County Assessor. Number three, you've had public officials, you have elected officials who have in our community who says who have not only said you should consider resigning, they said that you should resign. How do you weigh all that, and how do you come up with the determination that sticking in this is the best option for you?
Because ultimately the people I serve are the people that have the right to make that decision, not a select group of elected officials. There is legally only two ways to remove an incumbent assessor, and that is by a recall petition approved by a court and then put before the voters, or by election. I have nothing that I'm ashamed of. Do I have some things I'm not proud of? Yeah, don't we all? But the fact is, you know, after the Seattle Times ran its article in January, in part because it was triggered by somebody who had taken the information that Lee had given them and who actually themselves wanted to run for county executive, so they had a motive to destroy me. David Gutman, the Seattle Times reporter, filed an exhaustive public records request for all investigations, complaints, and that related to Assessor Wilson, and he filed it with the county as a whole and with my office. You want to know how many complaints he came up with?
How many?
None. There is one, though, and I'm going to tell you about it. It was never formalized, but an employee in Treasury saw the assessor on the 7th floor of the admin building late one afternoon kissing a redheaded woman. Any idea who that redheaded woman was?
No.
Yeah, Lee Keller. So I'm guilty of kissing Lee Keller in the office. Run me out of town. The shame is so much of the coverage, like you said, it's either very constrained or it's very overblown. And you find that clearly so many reporters frankly don't understand how the court system works. And so they assume, well, it's filed in court, so it's true. No, it's filed in court, but that doesn't mean it's true. And you have to figure out, and I think ultimately, Juan, you ask yourself, why are you running? Are you running for the ego? Are you running, for some other reason? Or are you running because you, honest to God, think you can serve the people of this county?
He is John Arthur Wilson. He is the King County Assessor, and he is running for King County Executive. And he has just laid out his heart to you in this interview, and on Rainier. And I appreciate your straightforwardness. I appreciate your candor. I've always appreciated you as a straight shooter. You know that.
Yeah.
We've all.
Well, that's the relationship you and I have.
We have. I mean, we have had opportunities where we've had to discuss some things that we did not agree on, and it would have. And John Arthur Wilson never holds back and lets you know where he is thinking and where the thoughts are, which is always appreciated if you can get that in public servants. How do you go about rehabilitating yourself? This is going to be in our final 5 minutes.
Right.
You have now about 2 months to go. The ballots will be dropping almost in about 6 weeks, and you have an opportunity here to rehabilitate yourself and get the public to believe in you again. How do you go about doing that, John? Especially after some media that may not have been fair or to your liking, and certainly a situation which is a very serious situation.
Well, yeah, I don't downplay the seriousness of the accusations, but I also would say that they're not true. That said, again, I come back to, what do voters really care about? And, I think one of the great mistakes that we as Democrats made in 24 is we wanted to talk about our punch list of all the great issues we wanted to deal with, but we didn't want to deal with the real issues that people talked about at their kitchen table. And again, I think, Juan, like both Auburn, I was out at Greenwood Senior Center shortly after that. Did any one of them say, oh my God, you're a terrible person? No, it was, so you can save me money on my property taxes? Yeah, that's the idea here. You'd actually do that for us? Yeah, that's kind of what we're supposed to do. I think it's not so much rehabilitation as simply getting out and communicating with people and answering their questions and talking about what really matters to folks. And what matters to folks, they want a safe community. They want a thriving community. They want a sense that there is some predictability, that there's going to be a roof over their head, a paycheck, and that their kids will be okay. They want a sense that those pressing issues that we do have, like homelessness, are being taken care of effectively and not in a way that just kicks the can down the road and goes, that's for somebody else to deal with. I think that's what they're desperately looking for. And I think, frankly, I'm the only one of the three of us that actually talks about that. The others either talk in word salad or, want to constantly tell you how great Sound Transit is. Well, if it's so great, why don't more people ride it?
John, we have 1 minute, and I'm going to give you, actually, we have about 90 seconds. I'm going to give you 90 seconds. And I would like to ask you this question. You are obviously showing some resiliency. Tell us why John Arthur Wilson, in this resilient manner, is the best candidate for the King County Executive's office.
Because ultimately, Juan, resilience and your ability to come back from adversity is the true test of character. And when you're executive, you don't get to pick the things. I was thinking the other day about this. When I worked for Ron, first of all, when he got elected that night, I was thrilled, and he pulled me aside. He said, hey, no, dude, did you look what happened to the Medic 1 levy? Well, Medic 1 failed. Medic 1, for God's sakes, failed. He said, you got to go rescue this. I said, yes, sir. And we did it. During WTO, there was the threat that they weren't going to bring the president because the streets were a mess and out of control. I worked with a team, and we got the city under control, working with the city, and then President Clinton arrived. And then coming back to a terrible, Black Friday back in 1999, I think it was, or 98, when my phone went off and a madman with a gun had killed Metro driver Mark McLaughlin, shot himself, and took a bus off the Aurora Bridge. The test there is, do you have the character to be able to know how to be human, concerned, and effective? And I have proven through adversity, but also through success, I do. And that is what's going to be vital for our next King County executive.
He is John Arthur Wilson. He is the King County Accessor. He is running for King County Executive, and he gladly came here for an hour to share with us on your community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Daniel Bellis and Fresh Juice tomorrow night, 9 o'clock. I mean, somehow I always seem to be at the golf course up at Jefferson Park, and I will stumble upon Fresh Juice. So hear more about so much of the music scene here in Seattle and what Daniel Bellis and those dudes are up to. Makes me feel young, Daniel. I enjoy that show so much. So, hey, tomorrow night, 9 o'clock, I believe that's on. I'll be hitting golf balls to it in the background of my swing. I'll have Daniel's voice going on back there, I'm sure. Once again, thank you so much, and we will touch bases with you next week on your community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio.world.